Welcome. Today, we're going to try and demystify the pretty complex world of ESG analysis. We're going to dive into the data, the tools, and really the core principles you need to have in your toolkit to navigate this whole landscape effectively.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll map out the entire ecosystem of data providers. Then, we'll pop the hood and see how their methodologies actually work. After that, we're going to get real about the limitations of all this data. And finally, we'll tie it all together with the core truths of why we even bother integrating this stuff in the first place.
Okay, let's jump right in. Look, to integrate ESG well, you first have to understand a fundamental question. Who is actually providing all this information? And spoiler alert, it is not a single source of truth. It's a really complex, varied ecosystem of different data and research providers.
And the players in this space, well, they fall into a few distinct buckets. You've got your huge mainstream financial data providers and sell-side firms who've bolted on ESG offerings. Then you have the specialist firms, the real pioneers in this space. And of course, you've also got not-for-profits and consultancies, and each of them brings a totally unique perspective to the table. Now, what's really fascinating about how this landscape has developed is this massive trend of consolidation. I mean, over the last decade, we've watched the big mainstream financial players just snap up all these specialist ESG boutiques. And what that's done is push ESG data from being this niche, alternative thing into the core platforms that pretty much every investment pro uses every single day. So, knowing who the players are, that's step one. But to really use their data effectively, we have to look under the hood. The next critical step is understanding how these providers are actually generating their scores and ratings. It's all about the methodology.
And this table just lays out the philosophical divide perfectly. Your mainstream firms, they often treat ESG as just another layer to slap on top of their existing financial analysis. But the specialists, they've built their entire process from the ground up. They're focused exclusively on ESG risks, impacts, and often use all sorts of alternative data to try and find an edge.
And even within those philosophies, the methodologies split even further. You've got your best-in-class approach, which is basically what people call positive screening. The whole goal is to find the top ESG performers in any given industry. Then you have a risk-focused approach. This one isn't looking for the best. It's laser-focused on one thing: identifying companies with material ESG risks that could come back to bite them on the bottom line.
All right, this brings us to a really crucial point for any practitioner. You can't just take a score at face value. Using this data well means you have to be keenly aware of its real-world limitations and all the challenges that come with it.
So what are these constraints exactly? When we actually start to work with these big databases and scores in our own analysis, what are the practical, on-the-ground challenges that we absolutely have to keep front and center?
You know, it really all boils down to this one fundamental issue. Unlike financial accounting, there's no single universally accepted standard, no GAAP or IFRS, for how companies are supposed to report on ESG metrics. And this lack of a clear standard, well, it's the root cause of so many other problems down the line.
And because there are no standards, you get these huge constraints. A provider's methodology can be a total black box, making it almost impossible to scrutinize. The data is often just self-reported by the company, it's unaudited, and there's a definite bias toward covering big, large-cap companies. But the biggest outcome, the one that causes the most headaches for practitioners, it's the incredibly low correlation between providers.
So this is what that low correlation actually looks like. You can take the exact same company, and provider A gives them a 75, says they're an ESG leader. Meanwhile, provider B gives them a 42, calling them a laggard. So practitioners just can't rely on a single score. Instead, you learn to treat different ESG ratings almost like you'd treat different sell-side analysts. You know, each one has a unique methodology, their own biases, and the real insight comes from figuring out why they disagree. So, with all those data challenges, you gotta ask, why are we even doing this? And it's essential to ground our work in the fundamental principles that are driving ESG integration. When you really get the why, the how becomes a whole lot more effective. Ultimately, it really comes down to these four key drivers. We integrate ESG analysis to try and find new ways to get better returns, to better understand and hopefully reduce portfolio risk, to meet the evolving demands of our clients, and of course, to comply with a growing mountain of regulations all over the world.
The guiding principle through all of this, the one thing you have to hold on to is materiality. I mean, with thousands of potential ESG data points out there, the entire practice of integration hinges on one skill: being able to filter out all the noise and identify which specific ESG issues are truly material to a company's financial performance and its long-term value. And it is so crucial to remember that this is not a static field. Not at all. The tools, the databases, the techniques, they're constantly evolving. This space is developing at an absolutely incredible pace, really driven by massive demand from investors and clients. It demands that all of us keep learning all the time.
And that rapid evolution leaves us with a final and, I think, critical question. As all our quantitative tools and data sets get more and more powerful, more sophisticated, how do we, as practitioners, make sure we protect the essential role of qualitative judgment? How do we make sure this remains an art and doesn't just become a purely mechanical box-ticking science?